I suppose every genre is, but classic romantic comedies feel like a dime a dozen. They really cranked them out back in those days. But when you get people like Howard Hawks and Barbara Stanwyck to be part of your comic extravaganza, suddenly your movie starts to feel a lot more special. Gary Cooper helps too, yeah, okay, but he was no Howie or Babs. Howie. He wouldn't take kindly to that one. But not even Howie or Babs were the equivalent of the tongue-enhancing joy you will get if you put Sparkplug coffee onto it. Sparkplug coffee on your tongue. Just douse your mouth with this stuff and your taste buds will be in seven heaven. And that tongue will be touched by the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that can be found in Canada. Howie. You can get yourself some half-calf or full-on decaf if that's your thing, and they've also got a wide variety of blends and roasts. In fact, try something new if you would rather drink a blend that suits December rather than continuing to ingest what you did back in the warmer months. For those of us who live in North America, we'll get what we order within a week. Well, North America meaning US and Canada. And we Canadians will get free shipping. Sorry, Mexico. So that sounds excellent, but what's even more excellent is to be a member of Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. That'll get you perks and deals that you'll appreciate a whole lot, and you will save money on every single order, kids. Since you can customize to get your orders when it suits you, and you can pause or cancel anytime, this is clearly not a Coffee of the Month club. Sparkplug gives you flexibility. They realize that sometimes a cool lady enters your life and turns it upside down. As great as that is, though, it can mess with your coffee consumption, so maybe you need to tell Sparkplug to cool it for a while. Here is your mission. Type sparkplug.coffee/HYES into your browser and start clicking on the things you like there. Order a bunch. Our HYES promo code will save you 20% off your next order. And with that, the Dwarfs and I suggest you help me cue our band leader to play his theme music. And action! Have you ever seen Ball of Fire? What's buzzin', cousin, and happy December. The holiday season officially begins today, even though most stores were treating their aisles like it was the Christmas season before Halloween had even come and gone. Anyway, this is the 552nd posting of the Classic Movies podcast known as Have You Ever Seen? We review films from long ago and we spoil them from top to tail. Normally this is a two-person effort, but my wife Beb doesn't take part in these Friday shows, so I'm Ryan Ellis, your host for the proceedings, your host and your grammar hound. Speak properly! Not that I don't mangle the language when it suits me, because I do, sometimes. When I record podcasts on my own, I tear through the plot sequentially, I go off on many a tangent, and I hope to make you grin with some impressions of famous people and famous characters. There will also be some general tomfoolery. I guess considering this is the first comedy I've covered on my own since Mrs. Doubtfire 3 months ago, there might be plenty of fooling of the tom. Suits the occasion. But before we break down the story of Ball of Fire, let's talk about its credentials. This is how I do's it. Howard Hawks' rom-com was released in select theaters by RKO on New Year's Eve, 1941. It was actually a Samuel Goldwyn production, though. Yeah, the guy from MGM, the G in MGM. I guess he obviously must have left the studio by that point. They even shot it at Goldwyn's studio in the summer and early fall of 41. Oh, and I guess Miramax bought the rights in the intervening years because it's their logo that plays at the very beginning of the print I saw on Canopy. The film didn't get a full release until a little ways into 1942, but that New Year's release qualified it for the 1941 Academy Awards. That was the same year as Citizen Kane and the eventual Best Picture winner, which should have been Citizen Kane, but How Green Was My Valley won. The Numbers doesn't rank Hawks' picture in the box office top 10 that year, so I guess it wasn't exactly a smash hit, although they've got Citizen Kane sitting at number 10. And here we always heard Kane was a box office dud. And it's not like there were only 10 movies released that year and Kane was in that spot by default. Plus, I read this whole thing about how Billy Wilder, who wrote the screenplay with Charles Brackett, was promised a big bonus if it did well in the opening weekend. Then Goldwyn tried to stiff him, then realized, no, I didn't. There's a good story, actually, online, if it's true. So it opened well. Anyway, sometimes the old movies, you just can't find the numbers. I can't, anyway. 28 critics have posted reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and all 28 of them have liked it. For those of you who aren't tops at mathematics, the tops, baby, that's 100%. The average is 8.2 out of 10. Wait, is it 100%? 28, 20... Yeah, I've proven I'm not that great at math anymore, but that is 100%. The average is 8.2 out of 10, and 89% of Rotten Tomatoes audiences have dug on the ball, too. In fact, critics go positively gaga for Howard Hawks' movies. 100% ratings. Ball of Fire, something called Ceiling Zero, and Flight Commander, which might be those propaganda war... No, it's in the 30s, though, not a propaganda war film. I don't know those two, but I guess they're actually features. Only Angels Have Wings, Red River, all 100%. His Girl Friday, 99%. Scarface, 98%. Bring Up Baby, 97%. Big Sleep, 97%. El Dorado, 96%. Rio Bravo, 96%. To Have and Have Not, 94%. I could keep going. Man, I didn't know Hawks was that well liked on this site. Congress entered Ball of Fire into the National Film Registry in 2016, along with The Birds, Blackboard Jungle, The Lion King, The Princess Bride, Rushmore, Thelma Louise, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Reviews of all 7 of those can be discovered somewhere on this channel. In fact, Rushmore was covered only a few months ago. It's been a big year for 1998 movies. Hawks' Flicker Show was up for several Oscars, but didn't win any of them. The great Barbara Stanwyck was up for Best Actress, and this, keep in mind, was the same year that she was in an even greater rom-com, The Lady Eve. So probably should have been nominated for that. The Best Actress winner that year was Joan Fontaine in Alfred Hitchcock's Suspicion. The other 3 nominees were Bette Davis, Greer Garson, and Fontaine's older sister, Olivia de Havilland. Not a bad fivesome. Fontaine and de Havilland were not fans of one another, by the way, so this was no ordinary race to win a trophy. De Havilland is the family name, not Fontaine, incidentally. I didn't know that, or if I did, I forgot that. But fear not, Olivia won twice later in the 40s. Sibling rivalry. Ball of Fire's other Academy Award nominations were for the sound, Alfred Newman's music score, and the now defunct Best Story category. And guess who one of the 2 guys with a story credit on this is? Well, I just said him, Billy Wilder. He and Thomas Munro shared that nomination, although Wilder wrote the actual screenplay, along with his longtime partner, Charles Brackett. Ball of Fire is considered by the American Film Institute, got through it, yeah, one take, to be one of the funniest American films ever made. I enjoyed this movie, but I beg to differ. Anyway, they ranked it 92nd on their Top 100 Laughs. It was also nominated for the Top 100 Passions. It was a nominee in the romantic comedy category of the Top 100 Genres, and a quote was even nominated. The line was when Stanwyck, as Sugarpuss O'Shea, says, "I love him because he's the kind of guy who gets drunk on a glass of buttermilk, and I love the way he blushes right up over his ears. I love him because he doesn't know how to kiss, the jerk." Of course, that's her talking about Cooper. And those 41 words have been repeated ad nauseum by people on a regular basis these past 82 years, haven't they? I mock, but Babs does sell that quote in the actual movie. When I read this ahead of time, I thought, what in the world? One of these quotes? There's so many AFI-nominated quotes, or even on the list quotes. Nobody's ever saying this. What does it even mean out of context? In context, it's a good quote, but still, one of the nominees for greatest ever. I'd rather this had made the Top 100 Passions than the Top 100 Laughs, incidentally, because I buy the love story, but my sides just weren't split by the humor. And with these people involved, that's a bit of a surprise. Wilder and Hawks and Stanwyck and even Cooper. While I don't have much use for the AFI's Top 100 Stars list, it is worth noting that Gary Cooper was 11th on the guys' side, and Barbara Stanwyck was 11th on the ladies' side. I wouldn't put Gary that high, but I would put Barbara a lot higher. She ought to be at least in the top 10, certainly over Marlene Dietrich. And I'm biased, but I'd go as far as putting Barr in the top 5. It's my wife, call her Barr. Okay, so those are the credentials for Ball of Fire. Let's pop the top on this story and get going. After the jaunty credits, we open with a title card that talks about how in 1941, so there you go, we know right off the bat that this is a contemporary story. So in 1941, there lived in a great tall forest named New York 8 men who were writing an encyclopedia. So these are the dwarf characters in this film, although it's 8 of them, not 7. Then again, when the dwarfs are called that later in the movie by Danny Andrews, Gary Cooper's character isn't supposed to be part of that, I guess, right? So he's the prince in this analogy. Someday my Coop will come. Anyway, this is a group of geniuses, but we're about to learn they know nothing. Nothing, I tell you. Of love. Nothing. Our friendly fellows are strolling through the park. I assume and hope that this is the Great Central Park, which I've said many times in this podcast is maybe my favorite part of New York City. I don't know why, I just love that park. And they're showing off their gray matter to each other by discussing random facts. While they chat about this and that, Bertram Potts, Gary Cooper of course, is reading while walking, then getting on the guys about how they're wasting time doing this when they should be working on the encyclopedia. He's the grammar guy of this group, the grammarian, and when they get back to their home office, he twice corrects their housekeeper, Miss Bragg, about splitting infinitives. Cooper, by the way, at 6'3", towers over most of these guys, so he really is the prince to their grumpy, Doc, Sleepy, and Bashful. And all the rest. Miss Totten, whose father funded this project before he died, comes in with her lawyer, or her accountant. Ah, well, she's cheesed that her company is still bothering to pay for the encyclopedia. The reason her father even authorized this at all is because he, the inventor of the toaster for God's sake, wasn't given as much space in the Encyclopedia Britannica as Thomas Edison and other famous inventors were. It's great that the old coot was willing to pay for a tool to help people learn about things, but how petty. So the long and the short of it is, Miss Totten wants them to finish this thing soon, not to give their research many more years, the way they were all planning. I think it was another 3 years, Cooper said. To help set up the plot and to establish this guy for later on, a garbage man randomly comes in to ask the guys if they can help him with a quiz. Dude just takes it upon himself to ask smart people to show off their smartness to help him. I guess there are worse things you could do, but how rude. The garbage man played by Alan Jenkins here throws around a lot of slang in this scene. The grammarian isn't a fan of this improper way of speaking, but he's also curious to learn more about it, which is part of his job, of course. You can't be an expert on grammar if you ignore the downside of grammar. And B-Pods comes to realize that his research up until now is pretty much a waste of time, considering just how many phrases the trash man is throwing around that he never heard of. It's like if you thought you were all set to take a math test, but hadn't learned anything about multiplication or cosines. Drawing board time. Bertram spends a day in the town, eavesdropping on people on the streetcar, and at the ball game. Wilder and Brackett must have had fun researching all these expressions while writing the script, and I read that they did some of the same things that Cooper does here to learn how people speak. Although most of these sayings haven't stayed relevant in our current slang-loving vernacular. And just when you thought we were overdue to see Barbara Stanwyck because we're 16 minutes into this thing, here she is. Sugarpuss O'Shea. Wikipedia says she's Catherine Sugarpuss O'Shea, although I don't recall anyone actually calling her Catherine. Anyway, Sugarpuss sings along with Gene Krupa and his orchestra. These guys, especially Krupa, played themselves in other movies of this era, but I always remember the name Gene Krupa from Taxi Driver in particular. Not that he's in that. I assume that Scorsese just wanted to give his movie some flavor, but he films this street drummer who talks about getting back to Gene Krupa's syncopated style shortly. So that guy, I think a real person who actually did that, they just thought, let's film him. He's the guy with the slick back hair, gets a little cameo the night Travis takes Betsy to the porno theater on their one and only date. But anyway, that guy was just imitating the Krupps. Here's the real thing. Sugarpuss sings Drum Boogie while the orchestra rocks out behind her. Actually, Babs didn't do her own singing. They dubbed in an actress named Martha Tilton, just like Rita Hayworth was dubbed in Gilda, which I covered fairly recently. When was that, about a month ago? After they finish that big number, Krupa sits down with Stanwyck and she sings some more while he plays drums using matchsticks and a matchbox. Okay, this is just showing off, sir. There's nothing wrong with making the Stans a nightclub singer in this film and showing off the talents of the real-life Krupa band, but I think scenes like this made it into the old movies just because studio heads thought they needed music. And it's also an excuse for a little fun. Liven up your flick. It's not funny, although maybe people thought it was back then. But all the joy comes to an end when knuckle-headed toughs Duke Pastrami and Asma Anderson show up and tell the Shug she's got to go on the lam. Did Asma ever actually use a puffer or pant for breath? I don't recall. I don't think he did. So why is he Asma Anderson? Pretty reductive nickname for that matter. Oh my god, 2023 lens. Their boss and her boyfriend is a mobster named Joe Lilac. The Fuzz want to question Sugarpuss about her man's exploits. Pastrami is played by Dan DeRea, by the way, and Ralph Peters is Asma. Bertram doesn't know anything about any of that stuff, including the Sapini. The puss monster thinks that he's going to serve her when he knocks on her dressing room door. But no, he wants to recruit her so he can study the way she talks. She's not into that and makes him scram. She thought this tall nerd was with the DA, but she manages to skedaddle with Pastrami and Asma before the real DA shows up to Sapini her. The three of them can't figure out a way to hide her for a little while where no one will find her, until she remembers Bertram gave her his card. So they cab over to the Totten place so she can take him up on his offer and use him for a place to stay for a few days. As the threesome is figuring out this plan, Bertie is telling the seven dwarfs about his night with Sugarpuss, and they are rapt. They want to know what she looks like, what color her hair is, and so on. It's a black and white movie, so obviously she has dark hair, but it could be black, it could be brown. I guess it's probably brown. I think they're so curious because they want to have something to, let's say, fantasize about when they go to bed. Not that they couldn't just go for another walk in the park and see many women who look just as good. It is New York City, after all. It's past midnight when Miss O'Shea shows up at the door, smiling ear to ear. Engage that charm, Sugar Crisp. The terrified old men run away from the girl, but they do eavesdrop on what she says to the Bertalicious one. Sugarpuss's outfit glitters like you wouldn't believe. I'm guessing Greg Toland set up lights in such a way to really catch the reflections. Cooper does a fairly comical double take when she takes off her coat and sees all this. I almost did too. Stanwyck wasn't as stunning as Rita Hayworth, but she does look fantastic here. She, of course, needs and wants to stay there with the guys, but Bert tries to put a stop to that. No woman is ever in their house past 7:30 at night. Not even Miss Bragg. They're all lifelong bachelors except for Professor Audley, who's a widower, and we'll learn more about that in a lovely scene towards the end of the picture. But the other seven don't care about any of these stupid no girls allowed rules, and they want her to stay. One of them even offers his room. I hadn't been laughing at this movie, but I smiled at how confident and cool Stanwyck is during this entire scene, ending it with a... She didn't clean their house and make personalized pies with the help of woodland creatures, but she's in all the same and, for now, safe from the long arm of the law. Dana Andrews was a cop in love with Gene Tierney and Laura, who can blame him, which we covered several years ago, incidentally, that movie, but that was 3 years in his movie-making future. Here he's the bad guy, the mob boss in question, Joe Lilac, who's being grilled by the coppers, at 5 in the morning. Joe plays such hardball that he won't even admit that's his name. Joe's lawyer gets a moment alone with his client and tells him that marrying Sugarpuss would ensure she can't testify against him. Well, okay, we already knew that back in this era, you had to get married if you wanted to have sex, At least in the movies. So you might as well get married to avoid going to jail, too. The next morning, the dwarfs tell Shugs that Asma and Pastrami dropped by and, naturally, used a whack of slang to tell them that the heat is even hotter than it was before. Miss Bragg, though, is disgusted to learn that these guys have what they're calling an assistant staying with them. Them just telling her the story makes them all flush. Comedy! Meanwhile, Bertram's travels the day before, during which he overheard people slanging it up, ended up being a recruitment mission of about a half dozen of them, too. So let the meeting begin, which lasts 3 days. Not straight, I don't think, obviously, but 3 days in total. Now, we know Sugarpuss needs to hide out, but don't the others have something else to do? The garbage man is there, and the newspaper salesman is too, but don't they have refuse and papers to deal with? Anyway, Bertie Boy is collating all the great slang they've taught him, although he still has a way to go to fit in with those who don't speak the kings. Sugarpuss has an important reason to be nice to her hosts, but she actually does seem to like them. There's no hint of contempt when she calls the professors kids or sweetie or lover. She even teaches the old fogies how to dance the conga. More music. Miss Bragg, though, thinks Sugar is the kind of person who makes whole civilizations topple, and she insists either she goes or I go. I think this old lady would have a little more credibility if Stanwyck was playing the character more as a floozy, or if she was treating the men badly. But she isn't doing that, so chill it out, Fort Bragg. Pastrami on Rye and the Asv, show up to tell her that Joe is free, but only for now. She needs to stay with these dudes for a little while longer. And they brought her a giant diamond ring. What an eyesore! What a way to be proposed to, by mobster's thugs, not even by the mobster himself. Will you take this woman to be a lawfully wedded wife, so that fact can keep your criminal tookus out of jail? Meanwhile, Bertram says he knows Sugarpuss is no longer running a temperature. She said she was that first night and couldn't go back out in the rain, so now she needs to go. He's chosen the housekeeper over his test subject. But in his very proper way, Potts does tell Sugarpuss that he's, let's say, noticed her a few times. Because he said he once liked the way her hair looked when she was backlit against the window, she walks over to one, and the sight stops him in his tracks. But he still insists that she has to leave. But she's just plain wacky over him. Stanwyck stacks a few books on the floor and gets herself at the same level as the very tall Cooper. Then she plants a smooch on him, some yum-yum, as she says. He runs away to do what he did the other times when he needed to calm down over her. Dab cold water on the back of his neck. Some water on the back of the neck and the God, Jackie. Potsy is flummoxed, but he continues to say she has to split. But he does want her to yum-yum him once more for the road. It's curious that this love story has the two of them kissing at almost literally the halfway point of the story, rather than waiting until the very end like many movies of the will they or won't they type did back then. And the passionate knocking does the trick because the potster changes his tune and lets Sugar Shack stay after all. When Bertram brings her breakfast in bed the next morning, Sugar Mama is wearing Joe's huge engagement ring, but she's wearing it inwards towards her palm so that Potsy and the dwarfs won't notice it. On that matrimonial note, Potts says he couldn't sleep, so he went out early and bought an engagement ring. His is a lot more modest than Joe's is, but I guess he really wants to sleep with her to have taken this step after knowing her for only about 4 days. He's wacky for her, sure, but I think this is just a Hays Code thing where you had to have the proper papers if you wanted to do some bumping. Joe manages to get a phone call through to Sugarpuss, using his thugs to work 2 phones to avoid being traced by the fuzz. He's trying to figure out how to get her to him in New Jersey, and she says flat out that she wants out of the Totten building, that she doesn't like being there. Stanwyck was a tremendous actress, one of my very favorites, but I don't think she's been selling it well enough that she doesn't want to keep spending time with Potsy and the boys. She seems to like these guys. I feel like the better performance of hers, as at least a pseudo-villain that year, was her performance in The Lady Eve. Well, a liar anyway. She's certainly a liar in this, and she's a liar in that. And in that, she fell for Henry Fonda, but she has subtle contempt for the lunk for a good long while. I don't see any of that here, despite what she just said to Joey Jojo on the phone. Since this is supposed to be Sugarpuss's daddy on the other end of the phone, Bertram wants to talk to the old man. So Joe slyly pretends that he really is her pops. Potts volunteered the information that he voted for the Republicans in the last election, although Democrat Franklin Roosevelt was still in the middle of his long run as the real-life president at this point. I'm not sure what Cooper's politics were. I think Republican, but I guess I can't entirely blame his fictional movie character for thinking it was time for someone else to run the country. I personally think Franklin D. did a great job all those years, but what was that, 12 years of the same guy? That's a long time for one administration. There wouldn't be another Republican president for another 12 years after this movie, when Eisenhower took over in early 1953. That happened only a few months after Cooper's Great Western High Noon, a movie that made noted right-wingers like John Wayne and Howard Hawks pretty mad. Potts tells the other guys that now that Daddy approves of the marriage, he's officially engaged. Although notably, she didn't say yes. The dwarfs all offer their congratulations, and yes, Joe literally called them the dwarfs when Sugarpuss first started talking to him on the phone. Some of them kiss her on the cheek, some on the hand, while others just shake her hand, and she seems touched by all of it. Speaking of touching, only in a bad way this time, Sugarpuss ends up in her room with Miss Bragg and ends up socking the bragger right in the kisser after the housekeeper discovers a newspaper that says their house guest is wanted by the coppers. Miss O'Shea just needs to buy a little more time to get to New Jersey, and Potsy's going to be heartbroken in Joyzy, or if Bragg had told him the truth right then, so same difference. What did Jeff Goldblum say about rationalizations in The Big Chill? Have you ever gone a week without a rationalization? Stanwyck plays hard on this scene really well, by the way. It's similar to how she plays Mrs. Dietrichson in Double Indemnity, not so much the way she's been playing Sugarpuss throughout this movie, so again, I'm being a little critical here. Although I read that Stanwyck hit Kathleen Howard for real and broke her jaw. Yikes. It was an accident, at least, and I guess Stanwyck was really upset about it. Since her character isn't too fond of the old lady, maybe it was a little method acting before people called it method acting, and it just went too far. But the fellas think their buddy is getting hitched to a woman they all have a crush on, so all the professors enthusiastically get gussied up, wearing top hats and probably tails, as they all crowd in a big car with the supposed lovebirds. I like the scenes where Cooper plays boyish in The Pride of the Yankees, and he was really doing it here. There's something sweet as chocolate cake about a giant man who could probably beat up King Kong, acting like a little boy. The wedding party gets in a car accident on the way to Joyzy, while Miss Bragg busts her way out of the closet Sugarpuss had locked her in. Tension, meet ratchet. Shuggy Baby calls Joe to tell her about the accident and how they're stuck in a motel. The car wasn't totaled, but it needs enough repairs that it won't be fixed until the next day. Joe is mad that she won't just walk out on Doc, Grumpy, Dopey, and the guys, which she was prepared to do earlier in the day, but now she wants to wait until they go to bed before she sneaks out. I guess she was just that overwhelmed by them kissing her hand and her cheek after they heard about the engagement to their boy Bertram. After sharing a toast with the guys at a roadside motel, Sugar goes off to her room and the old "a 9 falls and now it looks like a 6" trick happens to the number on her door. Back in the dining room, Professor Audley tells a lovely story about his long-dead wife, Genevieve, and the other fellows warble a song called appropriately, Sweet Genevieve, which touches the old prof so much that he asks them to sing it over and over. Ball of Fire isn't as funny as I was hoping it would be, but it really does have some sweet moments like this. Professor Audley leaves to go to his room, which one of the other guys tells Potsy is number 6. So that pays off here. Bertram has something he wants to say to the old man. And the 9-6 thing pays off as Potts goes to Sugarpuss's room instead. He does not turn on the light for plot purposes and confesses just how insanely in love with her he is. Of course, he thought this was all being said to his doddering mentor, not to the woman he's talking about. And now she's goofy right back as she jumps up and yum-yums him right on the mush. I chuckled out loud when, after Potts leaves the room, Shugs darts into the bathroom and runs a cold washcloth on the back of her neck. It's a clever payoff since he talked about doing the same thing a few scenes ago. Some water on the back of the neck to calm you down, eh, Shuggy? While all that good loving has been going on, Joe and his goons have shown up at the motel. Hired goons. The bad guy bops Bertram in the booper, then biffs him in the breadbasket for daring to have Sugarpuss's lipstick on his face. And now Potts finally understands who Sugarpuss really is, especially after Joe and the others flat out tell him. The man is smart, but he isn't sharp. Sometimes that's true of me, too. Many times. Potsy tells the cop who shows up with Miss Bragg that Joe and the puss left a while ago, so off they go to try to find them. But even Mr. Proper isn't above getting angry at the puss. I like when she tells him she had written down all her excuses for why she used him like this, but the page is blank. Wilder bracket kudos. So he stalks off while she sheds some tears on the bedpost for hurting the man she now loves. Which brings me to my movie in a nutshell. So, Ball of Fire in a nutshell. Grammar guy goes gaga over ostentatious ladylove who won't willfully love him back. At first. So the 8 nerds go back home. They're just so forlorn. The other 7 are almost as dejected as the jilted non-engaged man is. They all decide to bury their sorrows in work. Potts even vows to never speak about her again, although things pick up when Professor Gurkakov gives him that giant diamond ring. She threw away Joe's ring because she's got Bertram's, and I guess Gurkakov fished it out of the trash. Miss Totten and her lawyer or accountant or whatever he is show up with newspapers that describe the whole experience as even more tawdry than it ever was. These 2 scolds think this scandal will ruin the Totten name. Oh no. One of the headlines reads, Professor Bridegroom carries Ball of Fire across state lines. That's the name of the movie! Although I guess the working title was The Professor and the Burlesque Queen. I don't know if it's that better than Ball of Fire, but I'm not sure if the title they went with is aces either. Anyway, Miss Totten has decided to cut funding for the encyclopedia over all this, even though Potts tries to take all the blame, so the other profs won't suffer and have all their hard work go up in smoke. We're back with Joe and Sugarpuss, and we find out she won't marry him now that she realizes that she really is in love with her man, Potsy. Stanwyck rattles off that AFI-nominated quote about the reason she loves him, the ears and the jerk. Meanwhile, Pastrami and Asma break into the Totten building, and literally break in, actually, and hold everyone at gunpoint. So now Mr. Lilac has his fiancée over a barrel. That's my fiancée. If she doesn't marry him, the dwarfs are going to die at the hands of a couple of mugs. Through all this, Cooper plays the joy of realizing Professor Gurkakov was right, that she really is in love with him and not Joe, again like a little kid. It's a 180 from how he was just feeling seconds ago, but Coop sells that roller coaster of emotions pretty well. I believe he feels like he could be through with her 1 minute, but then over the moon about her again the next. It's Henry Travers's character, Professor Jerome, who realizes that Pastrami is sitting under the giant portrait of Mr. Totten, which he figures out they can try to make fall and knock him out. How they use their considerably huge brains to make this happen is clever, although I'm surprised that Asma wasn't paying a little more attention. What else is he there for except backup? He should be able to see what Gurkakov is doing, which is to use a microscope to reflect sunlight onto the cord that's holding up the picture. The rope burns and... Wait, Pastrami doesn't smell what's happening right over his head? I can't smell things, but most people can. To buy time, Bertram distracts the Goonie Goons by talking about smarty pants things, and the two guys get bored, so they pull out their Roscoes and just start shooting up the room. Just an excuse for more attention? What a weird turn. Asma has a little meta moment when he says, "Saw me a picture last week," and then he wets the sights in his gun, which is something Cooper regularly does in Sergeant York. The rope burning eventually works because the picture falls on Pastrami and knocks him out, while a couple of the other guys literally pull the rug out from under where Asma was sitting and pile on him. We're going to get the guns. Every single person who was just being held by the bad guys piles into the garbage man's truck and speeds off to New Jersey to try to stop the wedding. Even Miss Totten and her lawyer accountant, whoever he is, come along, hanging up the back of the speeding truck, those two are, and she's thrilled by how exciting all this death-defying is. Most of them, though, are inside where the garbage would be, even though the truck is currently empty and looks like it's spick and span. But still, in where the garbage is? Guess you gotta settle if you want to ride. The profs bust in on Joe and Sugarpuss with the goons' guns and shoot them incompetently, but the mayhem is enough to break up the ceremony. I would like to think so. That much noise and violence. Bertram had been reading a book to learn about boxing on the way over, but theory isn't enough to beat Joe. Well, at first. Our hero gets knocked down, but then he gets knocked down, but then gets up again. And he gets mad. That's when he got mad. Pops up and goes all Ralphie Parker on him, the way Ralph does to Scut Farkus in A Christmas Story. Victory! And all the villains are thrown into the trash truck. The DA awaits you, mugs. And to wrap up this story back at the house, even though Sugarpuss thinks it won't work to marry her egghead lover or to have a woman living with all of them, Potsy puts a few books down on the floor. Now his lover can stand on them and yum him some more, while the seven dwarfs do the... I guess the wedding is back on. Oh, I love happy endings. And we're out. Oh, but goofy question. Is Sugarpuss going into witness relocation immediately? Because she will be compelled to testify against Joe, and she even wants to testify against him, but he's got friends on the outside. Gangster friends. If any of the people in that house are alive for more than another day, it'll be a minor miracle. Now that's not such a happy ending. God, what a dark thought. Because I'm a stinker. So the cast. Stanwyck is the star of this one, I think so anyway, but Gary Cooper is top billed. He won an Oscar for his leading role in Sergeant York the same year he was in this, which was also directed by Hawks. That came out only about 3 months before this did. He and Stanwyck also co-starred in Meet John Doe for Frank Capra, which came out in May of 1941. The year Japan bombed Pearl Harbor was a wonderful time for these two stars and for Mr. Hawks. Coop took home his second Oscar for High Noon 11 years later. We covered Fred Zinnemann's great Western back in early 2014. We've also reviewed The Pride of the Yankees, where Gary plays Lou Gehrig. And he was in the Best Picture Oscar winner, Wings, the very first Best Picture Oscar winner. If I knew that factoid before a few days ago, it has slipped my feeble mind. I ain't punchy. Maybe I am a little punchy. Let's also not forget that a big legacy of Gary Cooper is that Tony Soprano held him up as a bastion of manly excellence. And who could question the judgment of Tony Soprano? But as for reviews of Cooper flicks on this channel, it's just been High Noon and The Pride of the Yankees before today, but at least we've picked his best titles. I've just never been the biggest fan of the guy. He's a bit stiff, although admittedly that acting style works well in roles like Will Kane, Lou Gehrig, and Bertram Potts. Oh, and how about this? Gary's mother's name was Alice, so Alice Cooper. I wonder if she had fascinating information about Milwaukee. Yes, Pete, he does. We're not worthy of Gary Cooper's mother. Barbara Stanwyck was brilliantly savage, or maybe savagely brilliant, in Double Indemnity 3 years after this picture came out, but also did great things alongside Henry Fonda in The Lady Eve the very same year this picture came out, and that was for Preston Sturgis. And she and Cooper were the stars of Meet John Doe, which was also in 1941. That didn't make AFI's Top 100 Laughs list like Ball of Fire and The Lady Eve did, but it was on AFI's Top 100 Cheers. So Babs had a remarkable run with 2 classic comedies, a very inspiring movie about meeting Mr. Doe, and then probably the greatest film noir ever, all in the span of only a few years. It's not like she doesn't have memorable flicks in her resume before this and then later on, because she has lots of things. But her early 40s is Hall of Fame caliber stuff that not many actresses can match at any point in their own careers. If you want a very nice moment, look up William Holden and Barbara Stanwyck Oscars on YouTube. There's a clip of them as they're about to present an award together, but he goes off script and thanks her for saving his career back in the late 30s. The studio was going to fire him from Golden Boy because I guess he was just sucking, but she stepped in and got them to give him another chance. He never forgot that and publicly gave her that lovely tribute about 40 years later, which I think she had no idea he was about to do. And incidentally, when I type in Holden Stanwyck Oscars, it's not the same clip it used to be, so you might not see the exact same thing I've found over the years. But then Travolta, John Travolta of all people, presents her with an honorary Oscar in 1982, and that clip's there, and you see at least most of what I'm talking about here with Holden and Stanwyck a few years before. And during that speech, when she won her long overdue honorary Oscar, she ended it by saying her golden boy got his wish because he always wanted her to get a trophy at the big show. And Holden had died only a few months earlier, so it was even more poignant. Classy stuff, and another reason to love Barbara Stanwyck. One last thing about Ruby Stevens, that's her real name, and this will anger the ladies out there, should anger the fellas too. Cooper made more than twice as much as she did making this movie. Apparently even Wilder and Brackett got more money than she did. I'm glad writers got paid pretty well. I hope it was pretty well, but more than she got? But sex discrimination aside, on we go. Henry Travers plays Professor Jerome, the geographer of the group. He went from doing this to being in Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt a few years later, what a great film, then had his best-known role as Clarence in It's a Wonderful Life. Both of those great motion pictures have been reviewed on this channel. Travers also had roles in things like James Whale's The Invisible Man, and also Dark Victory, a Bette Davis flick that might get covered next year since it's got all kinds of bona fides, and it's also going to be 85 years old. You guys know I like the 5s and the 0s. And for those who wonder why I said James Whale, it's because that's how Ian McKellen says it in Gods and Monsters, and I've always loved that pronunciation. Richard Hayden is quirky and a little mannered, but he's pretty good in his film debut as Professor Audley, the botanist. He was part of the ensemble in And Then There Were None, which isn't as great as Agatha Christie's book, especially because they compromised on the ending, but it's still my favorite movie of the weak year of 1945. And Hayden had a role in Young Frankenstein, which I'm pretty sure we'll get to next year when it's 50 years old, and it's one of the great comedies. And Bev doesn't love it, so I might do it by myself. Oscar Homolka plays Gurkakov, the scientist. He later worked with Marilyn Monroe in The 7-Year Itch. I don't remember Mama, but I Remember Mama got him an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor several years after this. S.Z. Sakal, I guess if you're American it's S.Z., but I'm Canadian. He plays Magenbrook, whatever, the physiologist. He went on to be one of the greatest of greats in Casablanca. He was also in Yankee Doodle Dandy. We've covered them both. In fact, both of those flicks came out in 1942, so he had a great run in the early 40s himself. And all the rest of the professors. I didn't write down all their credits. Dana Andrews is a mobster here, but plays a good guy in Laura and in The Best Years of Our Lives. Those are two films that were discussed on this channel many years ago. We also somewhat talked about the Oxbow incident back in 2018. Oxbow is great and deserves a full podcast someday, but we had just seen it and yapped a little about it during our review of A Simple Plan. So Andrews is another guy who had a tremendous run of excellent flicks in the 1940s. Dan Derea plays Joe Lilac's head goon, Duke Pastrami. The Double D made a lot of motion pictures. He was in The Pride of the Yankees, so that means he worked with Cooper again the very next year. And in the same year as Ball of Fire, he was in the Bette Davis flick, The Little Foxes. As for Ralph Peters playing Asma Anderson, I didn't write down his credits, but it looks like he was in 200 plus things in his career, so the guy worked a lot. The director of all these thespians was the great Howard Hawks. We covered Bringing Up Baby over 10 years ago because it was on AFI's original Top 100 list. That somehow is the only Hawks film that was. If you scroll way back in our archives, you'll find our gab about the marvelous His Girl Friday, and I went and yapped about his 1932 version of Scarface just a few months ago. He did westerns like Red River and Rio Bravo, reviews of which are also on this channel. So I guess this makes Hawks movie number 6 we've reviewed, and we could do another 4 or 5 of his and probably not stretch the word classic in doing so. Top of the podcast, I talk about his Rotten Tomatoes numbers. Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett co-wrote, as they did on so many films that Wilder later directed. He started directing, was it this year? It was either this year or the next year he directed his first film. This was the third time Billy was nominated for an Oscar for typing out something he didn't direct, although this was the last time that happened. Brackett's final screenplay with Wilder was Sunset Boulevard, by the way. If you're going to end a partnership, that's a pretty awesome swan song. Samuel Goldwyn was the producer. Goldwyn produced for a very long time. He started back in the latter 19-teens, so well over 100 years ago, and he was shepherding silent productions before he got involved with wordy directors like Hawks and William Wyler. He also produced My White Whale, Porgy and Bess. I've never seen it. I don't know where you can find it, but it's the only remaining movie that made any AFI list that I've never seen. I believe it's on YouTube if you're thinking that right now, but it's a terrible looking print. I don't think it's as long as it's supposed to be either, so I'm not counting that as something I can possibly see. Porgy and Bess was on the top of our passions. That's the list, by the way, that it made. Sammy G was also the boss on things like Wuthering Heights, The Pride of the Yankees, The Best Years of Our Lives, and The Bishop's Wife. All of those, guess what, are reviews that are on this channel. And there were legends working behind the scenes. 9-time Oscar winner Alfred Newman composed the music. Greg Toland shot the 4x3 black and white picture. Daniel Mandel cut it. Or is it Mandel? Probably Mandel. Okay, he's not exactly a legend like the other two are, but he was a good editor. He went on to win 3 Oscars for The Pride of the Yankees, The Best Years of Our Lives, and The Apartment. Newman and Toland actually share a title card during the credits at the beginning of the movie, so there's some star power for film buffs to see those two names on one card, and as we said on Citizen Kane many years ago, Toland shares Wells' directing card, which really didn't happen ever, including since, I don't think, but he was so vital to making that movie as the cinematographer. So what a year for Toland, 1941. Alfred Newman, the uncle of Randy and the father of Thomas, and also the father of, is it David? He composed the Fox fanfare we all know and love, but also wrote music for flicks like Wuthering Heights and All About Eve. I just said Toland was so great working with Wells on Citizen Kane, but also worked on Wuthering Heights, The Grapes of Wrath, The Best Years of Our Lives, and The Bishop's Wife. To wrap this sucker up, I didn't laugh much during Ball of Fire, but I did truly enjoy myself. This is an example of a classic comedy that might have brought out more Ryan guffaws another day. Maybe I wasn't in the right headspace to watch this when I did. Maybe taking extensive notes caused me to miss some of the nuances. This is a pretty big movie. They're not trying to be too subtle. Or maybe it just isn't all that funny, despite the talents of Wilder and Hawks and Stanwyck and everybody involved. I read something about how this was the last of the great screwball comedies, incidentally. I'm not sure there weren't plenty of excellent screwball comedies that came after this, but I hadn't even really thought about it as screwball until reading that trivia entry. I guess it fits that bill. It's bringing up Baby-esque, which is also a Hawks film and perhaps the epitome of that genre. Or maybe it's another Hawks comedy that should be called The Epitome, His Girl Friday. Maybe that's the best one. Lady Eve's one of the better ones. Anyway, truly hilarious or not, Hawks, Wilder, Brackett, and the team tell a fun story. The actors do a good job. I already criticized my favorite Stanwyck here a little bit, but still, she's good in the movie, just inconsistent. So while I don't think it holds a comedy candle to the Lady Eve, I would suggest any appreciator of the classics give this one a chance if you haven't already. If you have access to Canopy, well, that's how I saw it. For free, baby! So that was my take on Ball of Fire. In 2 weeks, you'll get another solo effort by yours truly. We'll only be 10 days away from Christmas by then. Bev isn't a fan of shooting her eye out, so she won't be part of the podcast for a Christmas story, but I'll take a look at it on my own while hoping nobody stuffs a bar of soap in my mouth. I guess I better not say, oh, fudge. But in 3 days, my wife and I will both be in your ears as we cover our second Lemon and Mathau comedy this year. It was the classic Neil Simon play turned film, The Odd Couple, several months ago. Now it's the somewhat Christmassy, I Hate My Best Friend Yuckfest, Grumpy Old Men. If you'd like to let us know what you think of this or any other podcast that can be found on this channel, fire off an email to haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twittix and drop us a line there. We're at MovieFiend51 and at BevEllis. We also toss our shows up on YouTube at some point the day we post the show in your podcast app. So it's always up on the podcast app first, but then YouTube within maybe 5-6 hours. The destination is at HYES Ellis. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, comment, like, share. Glorious up, baby. Speaking of destinations, how about going to sparkplug.coffee/HYES? They serve up a 20% discount to all ye who enter HYES into the appropriate box. And then you'll get some scrumptious coffee beans. Okay, thanks for joining me on this excursion. Come back to hear Bev and me on Monday when we analyze the putz and the moron as we talk about grumpy old men. Meantime, I'm going to fall for a dorky grammar lover and hope to God my ex-boyfriend doesn't use his mob connections to have me killed for tattling on him. And cut.